Okay, hello everyone. I suggest that we get started while others find their way into the session. So my name is Christian Snoad. I'm the WASH Innovation Consultant with UNICEF Sanitation and Hygiene team in New York, and I work with the Duke-UNICEF Innovation Accelerator. So welcome to this session on innovative finance in WASH, which is part of this week's virtual forum on social innovation. This forum is organized by the Duke-UNICEF Innovation Accelerator. This is a unique partnership that brings together Duke's expertise in innovation and social entrepreneurship with UNICEF's expertise in WASH, with support from the US Fund. And the accelerator supports selected sanitation, hygiene, and menstrual hygiene innovators to grow and scale their impact. So the focus of this session is on innovative finance in WASH and a little bit of demystifying innovative finance. We have a sort of a variety of profiles here today, including innovators from the accelerator, staff from UNICEF, some students and staff from Duke, and perhaps some external colleagues also. And as you would have heard a few times in sessions this week already, the current levels of WASH financing are way too low to achieve universal access of water and sanitation for all by 2030. Financial resources are a bottleneck for almost all low and middle income countries. And a recent survey by UN Water Glass from 20 countries revealed the extent of the funding gap at 61%. At the same time, the official development assistance, the ODA for WASH, has actually been decreasing over the past 10 years. So we need to innovate our financing strategies to encourage new sources of funding and to better leverage the finance that's already available. Some of our innovators in the accelerator, and also perhaps from the young changemakers who may be joining us today also, may have heard the term innovative finance before. But what does innovative finance really mean? Well, I mean, there's a range of options considered innovative financing, and we won't be able to go through all of them today. But who is it suitable for? And could it be an option for our innovators or for some other organizations joining this session? And to what extent will it solve our financing problems? This is a large topic, but we hope to set the stage today and help to bring some tangible, practical examples. So thankfully, we're very fortunate to have such a great group of speakers with us today, all experts in this field. Rob Mills is the Director of International Development Practice at Social Finance, which he joined in 2016. Rob advises NGOs, social investors, private enterprises on how development finance can more effectively tackle economic challenges. And he's advised several well-known WASH programs and organizations. Prior to social finance, he worked at the World Bank. Liang Zhao has worked with UNICEF's WASH program division in New York and as a WASH innovative financing consultant for UNICEF. She's been involved in developing UNICEF's strategy for WASH financing in the new organizational strategic plan. And she's now with UNICEF's Markets and Supply Financing Center in Copenhagen as a market research specialist. Sarah Custer-Lalanne recently joined IDE as the Global WASH Director, having previously managed UNICEF sanitation and hygiene programming in Madagascar, where she introduced market-based approaches to complement CLTS. So she'll be a familiar face to some of our UNICEF colleagues joining us today. So Sarah brings over 15 years of experience, including a decade in sub-Saharan Africa, and she previously also worked with the World Bank. And finally, David Auerbach is a co-founder of Sanergy, based in Nairobi, which takes a circular economy approach to manage sanitation and organic waste in fast-growing cities. He founded Sanergy in 2011, and the organization now serves 150,000 people every day with safe sanitation, converting 100% of the waste into valuable outputs, such as animal feed, fertilizer, or biomass fuels. David is a Ashoka and Echoing Green Fellow. He holds an MBA from MIT and has lived in Nairobi for the past 10 years. So what a great panel. Thank you so much for joining us all today. So Rob's going to kick us off by setting the stage with an introduction to innovative finance. We'll then hear from Liang about some example of what UNICEF is doing in this space, and then move to specific case studies of what this means in practice for IDE Cambodia and Sanergy in Kenya. As you're listening to the speakers, if you have questions or new particular terms you're not sure what they are, please go ahead and use the Q&A button so that we can track them. So Rob, I will hand over to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Particularly, I appreciate it is a holiday in the UK this week. So extra appreciation for that. I hand it over to you to share your screen and to take us away.
Brilliant, thank you, Christian. Let me just put my screen up and you can let me know if this is working. You can see, I think it says innovative finance, what role in WASH? And you have a presentation view, right? So I'm going to start with a kind of high level, I guess, exploration of innovative finance. And then I think the nice thing about this panel is we can then dive into real world case studies of innovative finance in action. And if I had one takeaway that I want you to go away with from this session, is really that innovative finance is not about financial engineering. It's about combining resources and funds in new ways for impact. So I'm going to come back to that message at the end. Now, if you dare to look up innovative finance, and you Google it, you'll find a lot of different things popping up. So if you do it, you'll find these and many more terms, instruments, methodologies, concepts, ideas. I could keep on filling this screen. And there are plenty of others out there. It's a pretty confusing landscape. And what I want to try and do is really just to simplify as much as possible. And for me, all of this boils down to just two objectives. One is around mobilizing additional resources, either public funds or private capital. So I've grouped some of those little bubbles into that side, or really around better bang for the buck. So essentially around improving the efficiency and effectiveness of aid money. Now, aid, you can find this in different ways, but here I'm talking about either grant money from philanthropies or official aid from bilateral or multilateral donors. And there's some things in the middle. Blended finance does both essentially, and there may be others, which are using public or grant money to leverage additional private investment in a way which maximizes the impact of the public money. But that's, for me, sort of really kind of a simple way of looking at this world. Now, everything on the right-hand side of your screen, I'm assuming you can see the same as what I can see, all of it has some grant or public funding somewhere in the mix. Public funding, again, that could be funding from a bilateral donor, but include things like concessional lending from a multilateral, such as the World Bank. So at Social Finance, what we're really interested in is how innovative finance as a concept can better leverage aid money to achieve the SDGs. In simple terms, can new ways of putting funding together make aid work harder? And that's really what I'm interested in. It's worth taking a step back. What is the kind of counterfactual here? What is wrong with the business as usual approach in aid funding? For me, there are at least 5 shortcomings of a traditional aid program. The first is that they very much tend to be focused on inputs, on activities, not on outcomes. So a traditional aid project is very good at ensuring that the delivery of pre-agreed activities according to a pre-agreed work plan. But it's often weak at connecting the funding to the results that actually matter. And certain key things tend to be missing. The incentives to deliver, the accountability for achieving results, and thinking about who is best to bear the risk. And those are some little themes I'll come back to as we carry on. A second shortcoming is that procurement in traditional aid programs is geared to least cost delivery of activities, which doesn't sound bad on the face of it. I mean, robust procurement manages fiduciary risk, and that's a good thing. but it's really about trying to acquire inputs and activities at least cost. And so what that conventional approach to procurement in an aid program is not good at is acquiring social impact. For example, and very relevant to this discussion with some of the Duke-UNICEF social enterprises, is that a social enterprise is good at generating social benefits, but procurement is not traditionally geared to measuring or acquiring those. So again, it's very good at managing the delivery of stuff, and it's not very linked to getting best results from that funding. Additional shortcomings, limited feedback loops. You'd find in traditional programs that a lack of essentially built-in live mechanisms that allow you to measure what's going on and react as you carry on. Not enough emphasis on collecting data and evaluating in a way that really feeds back into the most effective delivery of a program, which without that, it really impedes you from learning what's happening, what's working and what's not working on the ground. And then linked to that, traditionally, there are very high barriers to program adaptation. So even if you have data in a program that tells you things aren't going exactly to plan, and that's, I think, as everyone knows, is always the case in the complex environments and the complex problems we will work on, the bureaucracy to adapt to the project, to get a new work plan, to drop some elements, to bring some new elements in, is really hard. And that impedes the ability of the project to, those barriers impede the ability of the project to adapt, to pivot, to iterate in real time for maximum impact. And a last shortcoming of the way traditional aid programs work is that they are not really geared to innovation. This is not true of all aid programs. There are some grants that are specifically innovation exploration grants, but in a lot of programs, if a funded organization has been told to deliver a pre-fixed set of activities with a fixed budget, then the incentive to innovate, to take risks, to try something new is pretty limited. So that's the kind of background of why traditional funding programs tend to have a relatively weak link to results and outcomes. And then this is where essentially innovative finance comes in. And at this point, you may be thinking, well, that's all well and good, but where's the discussion on first loss guarantees and parametric insurance and credit assessments and some of the kind of technical finance stuff? But the message I'm trying to get across here is that innovative finance, at one level, can be all those instrument stuff, but more fundamentally, it's about new ways of working, about changing the behavior of actors in a funding relationship, both the recipient of the funding, but also the funder itself, so that everyone is aligned around social impact. And for me, there are 5 ways in which innovative finance can allow programs to work in different ways. And hopefully, as we go through to the case studies, we'll start to see some of this in a bit more sort of tangible reality. But the first of those 5 is around forming novel partnerships, if you'll excuse the photo. A well-structured innovative finance program can set out to, or can result in, partners working together who haven't necessarily worked together before, but around a shared set of objectives. And that new mix of insights and funding and risk appetite may actually be critical to achieving results. And then linked to that, the idea of risk appetite is important, and the idea of allocating risk to those who have the appetite for it. So you can find an innovative finance program that the allocation of risk to different parties, not least because there may be different parties such as investors in there, means that those who have risk appetite can actually use it, and those who don't want to take on too much risk can essentially offload risk to others. And in my experience, traditional donors are very risk averse, but investors, almost by definition, are seeking some level of risk. So already by having a new partner with a new funding instrument, you're starting to allocate risk to the right places. A few more thoughts on how innovative finance can enable new ways of working. One is that it creates, with the right structure, with the right set of partners and the right funding, it creates space to adapt and innovate. As I mentioned, funding that requires you to do a preset plan of things without change or without much room for change is essentially a bad way to tackle some of the complex SDG 6 challenges that we face. Innovative finance can create space at the front line for learning, for responding to what's happening, forming new partnerships, for trying something new. And that can be critical for delivering results. Two more elements which I think are important. One is around data and measurement, essentially acquisition of data for adaptive implementation. So if you want to be able to adapt your program and you want to be able to innovate, you have to know what's going on. You have to know what's working well and what's not. So you have to be able to have systems in place that allow you to gather data and to analyze it, and then feed back into the program. And lastly, and quite importantly, accountability and incentives for results. So innovative finance can allow you to structure funding in such a way that there are both sharp incentives to perform, but also clarity on who is accountable for the impact of the spending. So much clearer definition of who is responsible for what and where essentially the buck stops. So that's some of the kind of, I guess, the sort of theory of how innovative finance can enable new ways of working. Now, I want to just sort of give a quick example of how in the real world this might start to come together, and then we'll move on to some of the kind of more tangible case studies. The example I just want to pick is I guess the sort of classic business school valley of death, where a social enterprise or an enterprise starts up and it faces a difficult first few years as it works out its product, its service, before it starts to be able to acquire sufficient customers and scale up. So this is an example of how you could innovatively finance a program by integrating public and private funding to get through that sort of valley of death. So hopefully that's a pretty well-known kind of graph where cash flow is positive above the line, but often negative cash flow in the early years. So with the right set of funders and the funding that they bring, you could expect something like this. So you would have some initial philanthropic startup funding from, let's say, a foundation. You could then move at a certain point to outcomes-based donor funding from a larger donor, let's say an official donor, which in effect, by paying for the results and the outcomes that the social enterprise achieves, generates cash, essentially cash top-up for that impact. You could then see that would start to turn the corner in terms of the kind of cash flow position, and it would pave the way for private investment, essentially impact or social investment with a high risk appetite, pave the way for that to come in to provide the working capital to scale up. And then over time later, you could then potentially see ongoing public sector contracts for, let's say, this wash enterprise once it's at scale and its products and services are more mature. So you can see that's an example of how in the round, an innovative finance program can bring in different funders at different points according to the specific needs of the enterprise as it scales. Okay, so that's hopefully a useful introduction. What I wanted to do was just finish with a last word about all this innovative finance stuff, which is the importance of distinguishing between the actual intervention that tackles the challenge. That might be a sanitation enterprise working in an urban area. We'll hear that from David later, versus the actual role, if any, of innovative finance in delivering that intervention. And they are two separate things. And the point is that well-prepared innovative finance won't solve for an inappropriate or ill-prepared intervention, which in a way takes us back to the beginning, which is that innovative finance is not about financial engineering to solve all problems. It's about combining the resources and funds and partners that we do have in new ways, focused on impact. But the underlying program itself, of course, has to make sense. So Christian, let me finish there. I hope we can take some questions now, or we can carry on now that we've hopefully set the stage a bit.
Thanks a lot, Rob. That was great. Thank you for kicking us off. So we're going to move over next to Liang to share some examples around what innovative finance sort of means for UNICEF, and to share some examples of what UNICEF is doing in this space. If people have questions about what Rob has shared, please do use the Q&A button in Zoom. So Liang, over to you. Thank you. you're muted.
Thank you, Christian. I hope everyone can see my screen. And thank you very much, Rob, for setting the stage. So I'm going to jump right to it. And my first part, a bit similar to Rob, demystifying the financing, what we have communicated with colleagues internally within UNICEF. I think we colloquially use the words funding and financing very interchangeably. So we really made a point that internally, at least, that financing refers to repayable finance, and there is an underlying cash flow and potential revenues that would eventually pay back the financing. I'm going to jump through these first slides very quickly because Rob has covered most of them. And I think one of the points I do want to raise about the risk tolerance of private sector investors, particularly if we're looking at more commercial end of the investors, that eventually they are looking for bankable projects in WASH. And I want to stress over here that creditworthiness means that the borrowers are perceived to have the ability to pay what is owed in a very timely manner and also able to withstand the adverse impacts. And eventually the project is projected that it will be able to generate enough revenues to cover its operations and maintenance costs, the debt repayment, as well as some profit margin or buffer. And specifically for the WASH sector, and I think today we're focusing more on the sanitation and hygiene space. This is a very theoretical model, of course, but I do want to highlight that compared to some of the other products, at least on UNICEF's side, for example, vaccines, pharmaceuticals, or even water utility, sanitation and hygiene space, we're particularly in the perfect competition market, where margins are really low and dominated by small, medium enterprises. So for financiers, this looks to be a rather risky part of the industries or sectors, even compared to other more social sectors within low-income countries. So to start with, this is a relatively more challenging sector compared to to health and some of the others. And that's how we see innovative finance, is that it is a type of innovative use of grants to help a project to become bankable. So that has various ways. Perhaps we've gone to the next level of detail compared to what Rob said. The first point is similar to what Rob said about that the additionality, so that the combined public and private sources and payments from households or out-of-pocket payments are able to recover the life cycle of costs eventually. And then second, there are many tools with first loss or with guarantees that can perhaps cover some risk scenarios and make sure that financiers are more comfortable with the project. And then also to overcome capacity constraints through technical assistance, both in kind or with funding. And then the last one would be UNICEF support or our partner support to the government and ministry level to perhaps have dedicated lending for a priority sector due to the social benefits or externalities. And I do want to say a bit similar to what I discussed previously about the bankability, that these grants are scarce resources. So when we are balancing it and when we're deciding which ones to prioritize or which types of projects to take on, pragmatic results really drive the decision. So that's all of these three aspects: the access, particularly the market segments that UNICEF might be looking at, affordability, to make sure that our market segments will be able to afford the services, and sustainability, and that includes both sides of it, the financial and the environmental sustainability. And I think the second point is sort of what Rob was also saying, the clear and fair share of risks between the public sector and the private sector, and perhaps also the investors. And then lastly is that the business model eventually will become financially sustainable on its own, perhaps even on market terms, and the public sector could have an exit strategy. So with that in mind, this is UNICEF's vision of our area of focus. For this, that we do see financing as a programming approach, and it's very much interconnected with our work on enabling environment, our work on mobilizing additional public funding, the designing of the overall service delivery models to make sure that services are available and sustainable in the long term. And last would be the exploring of the financing mechanisms. I'm going to jump this and give you a more specific example of an initiative from our regional office in West Africa. So we are working in 3 countries, Nigeria, Ghana, and Togo, with this model of blended finance through sanitation microcredit. So basically, this is a sort of a complicated graph, but basically UNICEF's role is to provide capital injection, and that's in Ghana, that comes from donors, and in Nigeria, that actually comes from state governments. So injection of the capital to financial institutions, and you'll notice that we have chosen the regulating bank to be our counterpart, with the goal that we are really leveraging the existing infrastructure on the financing side, that we're not replicating anything, or UNICEF is not going in with a role that we are not familiar with, that we're really leveraging the local infrastructure here. So these regulating banks are the banks where MFIs, the microfinance institutions, put their capital reserves. So we think that they are a really good interlocutor through which we can work very efficiently to reduce the transactional costs. So basically, the challenge that we're tackling here is that the financial institutions, the local financial institutions themselves, have a very high cost of capital, or rather, perhaps the MFIs need to generate very high interest rate towards their own investors or financiers. So that the first element of the structure is that we are providing the capital to MFIs at 0 interest rate, or sometimes 2% interest rate, depending on the regulating bank. And then the second element is that the MFIs, they would then go to the borrowers. That includes both households and companies for sanitation loans, so that the support costs on the donor side or on UNICEF side is limited, and we're giving the MFIs more and more comfortability about lending to the sanitation sector to tackle this perception that sanitation sector is very risky. And I want to give one more example of, or just more detailed example of Ghana. As you can see here, we've channeled a grant to the fund manager, which is the Rural and Community Bank's regulating bank. Then they were able to lend to the MFIs at 2% interest rate, who are then able to lend to households and SMEs at 12 to 15% interest rates, compared to more than 30% interest rate of market rate. So far, the project is still on the smaller side of the scale, but we are working very actively to provide more capital, and also to document the learnings and evidence from this project, so that we can perhaps scale it up both in Ghana and in other countries. And I just want to make two more points. One is the criteria. Specifically, we're working to scale up the SME business financing side right now. And I think that with the criteria of selection of the businesses, it's really first from UNICEF side, we need to determine the programmatic results that we want to prioritize, the type of market segments that we want to prioritize, and really focus on one issue so that we can prove that even with limited funding, we can prove that this model has achieved programmatic outcomes in certain in an area after the completion of the project. And secondly, sort of leave the experts to do or leave the specialists to do what they're supposed to do. So allowing the MFIs to also assess the businesses. And over here, we may see challenges of, for example, some businesses are not able to provide collateral or they do not meet the criteria of the MFIs. And we're actively trying to bring in guarantees or risk capital from other donors to make it more useful for the needs of the local enterprises. And sorry, the last point I want to touch on is UNICEF's, so as you could see previously, we're trying to really connect it with the other aspects of our WASH program. So that includes the enabling environment, that includes bringing government, bringing regulators to make sure that the scheme fits well within the overall WASH program, and also bring in the demand generation side through our CLTS work. And we really, I think we really will look forward to partner with more partners, stakeholders in other countries. So I think I'm over time. So back to you, Christian, and I will be available to answer any of your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Liang. That was excellent. I really enjoyed that. And I think what a great example as well at the end around UNICEF using its position to help make financing more available to households and businesses so that they can then themselves invest their own money in sanitation or water. So another sort of leverage aspect there that's really great. And I understand that UNICEF has plans to expand this work as well.
Yes, I believe so. Thanks. Thanks.
Okay, great. So on that note, let's pass over to Sarah at IDE to hear about what they've been doing in Cambodia. Sarah, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Christian. Are you able to pull up the slides? In the meantime, I can introduce myself. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Custer-Lalanne, and I am the Global WASH Director at IDE. I noticed some familiar faces among the participants, as before joining IDE just 2 months ago, I was working at UNICEF in Madagascar. So I see some familiar colleagues here. So IDE is an international NGO and social enterprise incubator that believes the best way to end poverty is to power entrepreneurs. So we coach businesses to improve their communities and stimulate the market ecosystems in which they operate. So to date, our WASH marketing efforts have reached 6 countries, including Cambodia, which is the focus of the presentation today. So I'll be talking about the Cambodia Rural Sanitation Impact Bond, or Development Impact Bond, which I'll use the acronym DIB for. Next slide, please. So the Development Impact Bond has been a critical investment in IDE's flagship sanitation program in Cambodia, which is the Sanitation Marketing Scale-Up Program, or SMSU. It's the first market-based sanitation program in the world to reach such significant scale. And on the left-hand side, you can see a snapshot of where we are today. So since 2009, the program has driven the sale of over 390,000 basic toilets, enabling over 1.85 million people to gain access to basic improved sanitation. those of you that participated in IDE's presentation yesterday on selling wash have already heard about our 4 pillars, and the first 2 of which are starting with people and design to context. So the team started on this journey in Cambodia by listening to customers and latrine business owners' needs and desires. And then we use these insights to design sanitation products like the Easy Latrine, which is an affordable but aspirational sanitation solution. And then with the right product in place, we trained and provided ongoing coaching to small businesses to manufacture, deliver, and install the toilets. As you can see on the chart to the right, through the first 2 phases of SMSU, we contributed to an increase of sanitation from 29% in 2012 to 67% in 2018 in the provinces in which we were working. So the goal has always been to reach full sanitation coverage as quickly and as efficiently as possible, especially since many of the benefits of improved sanitation only really start showing as coverage rates reach 80% and above, and ideally as the whole community reaches ODF status. So in designing the 3rd phase of the program, we knew that one of the primary objectives would have to be helping communities to reach open defecation-free status. So as we neared the end of the 2nd phase, so SMSU 2 in 2017, we also knew that we needed to change our model to reach the remaining non-toilet users who were in large part the harder to reach, poorer and more marginalized segments of the population compared to the households that we had reached previously. So as you can see, as the curve is starting to flatten, coverage is still increasing, but at a decreasing rate. So that's where we knew that we needed to change our approach. Next slide, please. So this meant that we needed to scale our program so that whole villages could apply for open defecation-free status. And because we were trying to reach more difficult areas, more difficult households, we knew we needed a different funding approach. So we needed more flexibility to adapt and to test new approaches. We needed flexible funding and space. That was some of the core requirements for IDE to take this on as a challenge. So why a development impact bond? So a DIB, or development impact bond, is about having clear outcomes from the outset. So as Rob already mentioned, we need to be clear about the results that we want to achieve. So having clear and measurable outcomes. In this case, we agreed on an objective of 1,600 villages claiming open defecation-free status. In our case, a DIB also made sense because of IDE's track record. So this approach might not be best for maybe smaller organizations that don't have the same track record. And in our case, we were fortunate enough that we had a working relationship with Stone Family Foundation over a number of years. So the Stone Family Foundation went into the development impact bond with us with the confidence that IDE would be able to deliver on outcomes. And IDE also has a really robust data management system, one of the other pillars of IDE. And this was key because we needed to have timely and reliable data, both to report on the outcomes and also to ensure that we're able to adapt on the ground to make sure outcomes are able to be achieved. So IDE actually worked with Rob and the team at Social Finance with Stone Family Foundation, and we were able to get USAID on board as an outcomes buyer. So if you can go to the next slide, it shows what the model is. So the development impact bond is a results-based approach that's designed to strengthen the link between funding and impact, where the finance for the program is provided by the risk capital. So on the one hand, we have an impact investor, or in some cases, it's called a social investor, who provides upfront capital for the service that needs to be delivered. to achieve a social outcome. So in our case, the Stone Family Foundation was providing upfront investment and risk capital in order for us, the implementing NGO, to be able to deliver on the service, or in this case, being able to deliver those 1,600 ODF villages. And then we had an outcomes funder, or sometimes, or a donor, who repays the investor only if the pre-agreed outcomes are achieved. So USAID pays Stone Family Foundation back for their upfront investment only when we achieve the outcomes that we said we would. So the Stone Family Foundation has provided the upfront capital, which is 100% at risk, and they are able to actually receive a premium from USAID, so a return on their investment that reflects the risk that they've taken. So that's also what's in it for them. There's also a financial bottom line in addition to the social one. So as you can see, it's really different from a traditional activity-based approach, as Rob was saying, where a donor designs the programs according to a predefined set of activities, where you have to develop a log frame. So with an outcomes mindset, we agreed on the results we wanted to achieve. We validated the metrics we were going to use and the data sources. And that meant that we had more room for iteration and adaptation. And USAID only pays if we're able to achieve our objectives. So for this particular development impact bond, one of the hallmarks has been the simplicity. We only have 3 partners. Some development impact bonds have multiple stakeholders, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it likely increases the transaction costs and the coordination. We have 1 outcome metric, which is the number of villages that claim ODF status. Other impact bonds might have more outcome metrics. So if you can go to the next slide, Christian. So just briefly, this has been, we're 2 years into the DIB now, and it's still proving to be a relevant model, just as it was intended to be, in terms of aligning incentives. So unlike a traditional grant, because it is outcomes based, the DIB provides the flexibility for us to evolve in a changing environment. And I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of how we were able to pivot with COVID. And the impact investor and the implementer, so us, IDE and Stone Family Foundation, are really incentivized to work together to achieve the outcomes. So it's been great to have their ongoing support and close collaboration with the impact investor, as well as with USAID. Evolving from donors to impact investors. So results-based financing models like this one create an opportunity for implementing organizations like IDE to take advantage of the evolution among donors that are shifting from grant funders to impact investors. So this is not unique, but Stone Family Foundation has been moving more and more from being a purely grant-making organization to becoming more an impact investor. So this was also an opportunity for them to shift their approach. And then results and impact is at the heart of the model. So we know that results-based financing can improve value for money while increasing the effectiveness and efficiency of programs. So especially for USAID, the DIB ensures that taxpayer money is being used as efficiently as possible, and they're only paying when the results are being achieved in support of Cambodia reaching its national targets in terms of sanitation. So next slide, please. And maybe I'll wrap up here. So in terms of results to date, so 2 years into the DIB, the outcome metric with still a ways to go. So the DIB is ending at the end of 2022. We were able to achieve 1,100 villages that have filed ODF claims. And we've been consistently meeting or exceeding the targets set for each milestone or 6-month period. So what this means in a little bit more technical terms is that we invoice up to the maximum number of permitted outcomes for each milestone period. So every 6 months, there is a report submitted to USAID saying we were able to reach the 250 village ODF milestone in this 6-month period. And then they provide the payment to Stone Family Foundation. And then Stone Family Foundation is able to recycle some of those funds from USAID and provide them to IDE. So in the end, Stone Family Foundation is not even putting up the whole amount of the program cost because they're able to use the recycled payments from USAID. Another, as I mentioned, advantage of the DIB has been the flexibility. So we've been able to also integrate COVID-19 awareness raising into our programming. This has helped us to stay relevant by addressing kind of the elephant in the room. It's hard to go into a community and start talking about sanitation when there are larger concerns on people's minds. So it's been a good opportunity to include this into our programming. And ID has even received an award from the government of Cambodia for its contribution to participating in COVID-19 information campaigns. So I think I will stop there. I had another slide just talking about other IDE programming, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them now or later on. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sarah. It's really good to see a sort of a practical example of what some of these terms and concepts mean in practice. We're going to head straight over to David at Sanergy to share a bit about his example. Sarah, I see a couple of questions that you could in the questions section for you as well. So, David, over to you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Hi, I'm David Auerbach. I'm one of the co-founders of Sanergy, based here in Nairobi, Kenya, and it's great to be here today. Sorry, I'm just putting this into a nice mode you can see. Great, and Bill, go for something completely different from what Sarah's doing, but similar in so many ways. Is looking at this from the urban perspective rather than the rural perspective. So, just to very quickly bring everyone up to speed on sort of how we think about this challenge. Most of the cities are growing extremely quickly right now. Informal settlement populations are going to increase from 1 billion to 3 billion by 2050, and we have huge environmental, health, and economic consequences from this. People, waste is not being treated and polluting rivers and waterways, destroying the environment. People are dying in Kenya. Globally, we have over 1 million sanitation-related deaths every year. And economically, we lose about $260 billion in global economic productivity. All of these, actually, we think, help give the case for where outcome-based funding and more innovative financing can come in. This is what it looks like in Kenya. We have similar challenges. 10 million people in informal settlements. 90% of the waste is unmanaged, and we have about 17,000 children dying each year, and 1 to 2% equivalent of GDP is being lost due to sanitation impact. And we see this because there's two big challenges, and I think Rob really brought out some of these challenges really well. One is that the focus is on access, and which is actually leads to a heavy dependence on capex of building toilets rather than ensuring that waste is being safely managed across the value chain. This bears out really clearly here in Nairobi, where most of the investment goes towards containment, and in fact, their containment scores are pretty high. If you track the ship flow diagram, you have about over 70% of the population has access to good sanitation facilities, but then you lose all of the waste across the value chain as you move across the value chain because there's no investment there. And the second is cost. Big reason is that sewers are expensive and not feasible for all areas. We use work done on Dakar, Senegal has shown that it costs about $56 per person per year to provide water-based sewer systems. Kenya spends about $3 per person per year, and the goal is to get to $12 per person per year. So even if they are able to meet those goals from what they've committed through the Ngor commitment, we're still 5 times short on what we need for solving for the most typical way that we've looked at this challenge. This is where Sanergy comes in. It's a full value chain approach for non-sewered areas. So we're building low-cost, affordable, container-based toilets. We work with community members who operate them as small businesses or as value-add services for residents living in informal settlements or in residential compounds. We undertake the safe collection and transport of the waste, and then ensure that the waste gets treated into valuable agricultural inputs, which is a whole other component that is helping to spur the increased food supply and regenerative agricultural inputs. So this is what it looks like on the sanitation side. You can see we have these nice bright blue facilities called Freshlight Toilets, and we have this container system underneath. And what we do is we sell those into the community, and residents are investing in these solutions by a subscription model. They pay about $10 per month to have a Freshlight toilet in their home. Or in their residential compound, I'm sorry. And what that guarantees is that they get the regular safe waste collection of services. And our commitment is that the waste then also gets safely treated too. Indeed, we've actually built through a partner organization entity, the largest organics recycling factory in sub-Saharan Africa that has the capacity to take on about 70,000 tons of waste per year. And this is just outside of Nairobi. So where we are right now is it's an interesting situation, right? So we're serving about 150,000 people with safe sanitation every single day. We know that there is a strong social benefit. I think a lot of this work actually came not from UNICEF, but from Guy Hutton's work, who's now at UNICEF, about the social return that you get from investing in sanitation. We are also showing significant amounts of waste being safely collected and treated every year, and significant carbon offsets too, because of the capturing of the waste. And this is what's interesting about our work. Right now, if you remember that first map, diagram. Sewers are about $56 per person per year, right? To operate those, the amount borne of that cost by government is effectively $54 per person per year. Now, with our model, with the offsets that you're able to achieve from customer revenue, from customer cost borne by treatment provider, the net cost of deliver these services are $18 per person per year. So already you're basically at a point that's about $3 cheaper, 3 times cheaper than what is being offered in sewers. And this just gets cheaper and cheaper with scale. And indeed, it dips down to less than $10 per person per year is what is needed to be able to provide these services, in an ongoing sustainable way. This is so much more cost effective and guarantees that you're serving the lowest income population, which is a huge part of the challenges that we're also seeing in the financing sector, where most of the money is not actually going to the people who need it the most. And so this comes back to this original graph. And as you can see on the right, the government intends to be paying at $12 per person per year is what their contribution is expected to be able to serve everyone with safe sanitation. So this solution is actually getting to meet the government where they are. Now, the government's not there yet, and this is where we've started to be able to think a lot more about what innovative financing can be done. And in fact, I've started to work very closely with social finance on how do we actually frame this to create an outcomes-based model, right? So if we're able to show that that we can safely manage the sanitation for less than $10 per person per year, how do we shift the funding from how we've been funded to date, which has been mostly through the generosity of philanthropy, to put that onto government to be able to pay that. And we think that that's actually, that's not just a one-step process. That's at least 2 steps, of which using the social impact, the outcome results-based financing, outcome-based models make the most sense to be able to do this. And so what we're working is, okay, what is the value proposition? How do we show to these 2 outcome funders that this is what they should be paying, with a view that not only if we can get this right in Nairobi and make it the most, be able to get to be able to then get the government to be the ones paying for this over time, but then also have a template for success to go elsewhere too. And so that's what's become really exciting about this, is that this is actually, helping the government think, helping the government and the sector think very differently about what that financing should go towards, rather than immediately thinking about this. Okay, how can we make this to be completely profitable, when what we're seeing within the conditions that we work with, particularly in the lowest income areas, is that some cost allocation is going to have to come from the municipality itself, or in lieu of that, outcome funders. And so we've been able to really push that dialogue quite significantly over the last 2 years, and now are moving into this phase of being able to work with organizations to develop a similar contract to what was being presented by Sarah at IDE. So I'm going to stop there because we're at the top of the hour, but happy to take questions or thoughts there.
That was great, David, and great to have a contrast from the rural sanitation example from IDE with your urban example. I see that there are people have been, the panelists, thank you for answering the questions in the question box, much appreciated. Okay, we just have a minute left, so I think that there isn't time to go into questions here during the session. This definitely could have been a 2-hour plus session and beyond. In fact, this could be a topic of a whole week. But I hope that this served as providing an introduction to this term, to perhaps demystifying some aspects of it. And I hope that the practical examples were useful. If anyone would like more information, when this recording is shared, we will also share links to some resources, and you can also reach out to some of the people that presented directly. So we're going to wrap up here. I'll say a final huge thank you to our experts that joined us today, to Liang, Sarah, Rob, and David. Your presentations were excellent. I'll leave this call open now, so if people want to have a look at the Q&As, they can. But that's me signing off and heading to the next session of the virtual forum. So you can visit the Duke-UNICEF website to see the sessions we have remaining. And on Friday, we have a big pitch event where our innovators are pitching their innovations. So thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your day and week.